Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today's NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. Joining me, as is almost always the case, is my co-host, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, as we are in the middle of our 2026 NFL Draft preview for the Arizona Cardinals as we take on another position, one that the Cardinals, it is not a priority for them. We're in episode 766. This is about the tight ends in the draft. Seth, I know the Cardinals might or might not draft a tight end, but it is always good to get to know some of the prospects who are like, we'll be following the draft. Like if you're listening to this show, we know that you really like the NFL draft in general. And so you will be paying attention to that for certain. And so it will make sense to know who the major players are. If you've listened to us in previous years, we did kind of peg Tip Ryman as a guy. Now, he ended up going third round. We didn't expect that, but we pegged him as a guy that would have been a really good fit for the Cardinals, and they got him. But the tight end class is there are some really high end guys, and recently it's 2 to 3 might go in the first round, which is like right now for sports books, it's gonna hurt them because they've had the line set at 1.5 with over 1.5 plus money for a while, and recently they're projecting as many as 3 tight ends going in round 1. Do you think ultimately that many will go, or is it just going to be Kenyon Sadiq, or are we going to get more than that, or is the tight end making a comeback?
No, I think the tight end's making a comeback. I mean, we've seen Trey McBride, we've seen, obviously guys like George Kittle and obviously Travis Kelce, but he's as much as he's been, great, he's also old, and so like he's been around for a long time. But we've seen, that these teams will take chances on guys, and the reality is, the reality becomes that the position is now kind of back in vogue, where we're seeing teams look for bigger, more physical players that can, help a little bit in the run game, but do different things in the passing game, to combat the athleticism, specifically at the linebacker position on the field. And so what you're seeing now, because remember, the Cardinals were part of that culture, drafting Dayon Buchanan, getting those undersized athletes that could move and, really overwhelm the big plotting tight ends.
Isaiah Simmons' pick was at one time, it was, hey, we've got a guy that can cover George Kittle.
Yep. And so that's how it was looked at, and that's what the plan is. And so now you're seeing the modern tight end, right? So you used to have kind of the undersized guy. You'd have the guy that was your move piece, the 6'3", 6'4", 225, 230 pound types. And then you would have your Tip Rymans, right? The 6'5", 265 blocking tight ends. And now you're seeing that hybrid, and we talked about George Kittle's kind of the godfather of that, for every Travis Kelce, who's just a savant and just a guy that for some reason can continue to put up 1,000-yard seasons well into his mid and late 30s. there are guys that give you a little more from the all around perspective. And realistically, right, the prototype was Gronk, right? The big tight end, you could flex him out wide, and he was so big that no DB could cover him, whether it was a safety or a corner. And then if you kept him, or if you moved a backer out there, he was too athletic. And that's the key now, is that's what you're looking for. And that's headlined obviously in this class by Kenyon Sadiq. He's kind of the model of the overall move slash big tight end. I think when people think about Sadiq, they look at him and they see, he's a lean guy, right? He doesn't necessarily look like the hulking tight ends of now, but he came in at good size, 6'3", 241. He's a little bit smaller than Trey was, right? But then he tested, and you're like, holy crap. Like at 241, he ran a 4.39. He had a 43.5-inch vert and 11 1-inch broad. Like, you're talking about elite testing numbers for a wide receiver. And he moves that well at 241. So he's kind of the ultimate matchup nightmare because he's too big for any DB. He's too athletic for those 240, 250-pound linebackers. And so, like, that's the guy that's at the top. You look at what he did last year, 114 snaps in line, 241 snaps in the slot the year before. It was 60 in line, 72 in the slot. Eight touchdowns, 560 yards. I know people will question the production, and they'll go, well, I'm drafting a guy in the top 15. I want more, right? Like, I want more production. And I get that, but there's very few Brock Bowers, right? That had all of the stuff that checked all of the boxes, and then had elite level production as well. There's, you look at a guy like Trey coming out of Colorado State. Trey, in his first 3 years, his production really kind of mimicked what Kenyon Sadiq has done. Outside of Kenyon Sadiq had, more touchdowns. But you look at it, you saw, 89 yards, you saw 24 yards receiving his freshman year. For Trey, it was 89. For Sadiq in 2024, he had 307 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. For Trey, he put up 560 his sophomore year. And then year 3, ironically, Sadiq put up 360 and Trey fell down to 330. Now, he only played in 4 games, so he probably was poised for something bigger than that. But you've got a guy that, increased his production every year. And maybe, who knows, maybe Sadiq, if he came back for his senior year, maybe he has an 1,100 yard season like Trey McBride had. But the reality is, when you're in a class that's not this great, and you're that big, and you move that athletically, you're at worst. And I don't want this to come off as like a negative, because it was such a positive coming out, but you're at worst Vernon Davis, right? Vernon Davis coming out of Maryland back in 2005 or 6. I don't remember exactly what draft class it was. He was that guy. And it took him a long time to kind of live up to that hype, right, in San Francisco. He never really lived up to it until year 4, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, now we understand how to use him. Now we understand how to move him around. But I mean, we're talking about a tight end taken 6th overall, and he made 2 Pro Bowls. He was part of a Super Bowl team, a Super Bowl winning team with the Broncos in 2015. But like, a 6th overall pick to only make 2 Pro Bowls, like people would scoff at that, right? But that's kind of what Sadiq could be, um, in the right place, and obviously then the ceiling could be even more with the way he looks. From there, it really is just kind of now, what are you looking for? I think the consensus number 2, and on the consensus big board, he is number 2, is Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. Um, Stowers is a guy that,
Leaner. He's leaner,
yeah,
6'4", 235.
right. And again, you look at a guy like Stowers and you go, okay, he's a 5th-year senior. He's hopped around. He was at Texas A&M for 2 years as a quarterback, by the way. And then he went to New Mexico State, and that's where they kind of transitioned him to tight end. And then he went to Vanderbilt, and he went to Vanderbilt, and you kind of look at him, and you see that production at Vanderbilt: 49 receptions for 638 yards, and 5 touchdowns in his senior season, quote unquote, and then his super senior season: 62 receptions, 769 yards, 4 touchdowns, an All-American. Now, obviously, this was one of the best, if not the best, Vanderbilt teams in school history. I mean, it's been a long ass time since they finished with that high of a ranking. Uh, and so for that to happen and him to be a huge part of that says a lot about his ability. Like you said, a leaner prospect. He's not going to be as versatile early on. Doesn't mean he won't be later on, but as early on, as a guy like Sadiq. But I like Stowers. Then from there, you get your old reliable schools, right? Max Clare of Ohio State. You get Sam Roush of Stanford, and you get Oscar Delp of Georgia. What's really interesting about all 3 is that
So are these guys are these guys more? Where are our round 1 guys? Do you think those
I
guys creep into round 1 at all, or are those more day 2?
the one guy that is interesting, and I don't think he'll be a round 1 guy, but the one guy that's really interesting is Delp. Delp was supposed to be the next Brock Bowers. 6'5", 245 pounds, shorter arms, decent sized hands, but like, everybody kind of looked at him as the guy. I don't think he's going. Um, I don't think he's going to end up going even on day 2. But there are people that are like, "Oh, he's being underlooked." It's like, this dude was a 5-star tight end. Like, how is he being underlooked? But he's done genuinely nothing in his career.
Oh. But if you're looking at, I just want to kind of split this up. And so, do you think it's 2 or 3 that go in round 1?
um, I I think it'll end up at the end of the day being 1. I could see a team falling in love with Stowers, especially his upside, right? Because he's played the position so little and he is such an athlete. But I think it's just 1 right now.
Okay. Well, then let's break and hit on the day 2 guys. So coming up next on the Res Receiver podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk a little bit. Let's move on. Let's talk about these guys that'll be day 2. That's coming up next on Res Receiver. We're back on the Res Receiver podcast, Best Star Cardinals talk on the web. We've got 1, maybe 2 guys that go round 1. Seth just named several guys that could be day 2. Was talking about Oscar Delp. Is you think he might actually go day 3?
It just depends. I mean, you're talking about a guy that, again, he was like one of the highest recruited guys coming out. And then he just never found his way at Georgia. Played in every game, every season, 284 yards, 3 touchdowns, 248 yards, 4 touchdowns, 261 yards, a touchdown.
His yards per his, it's really, I see this in the NFL a lot. Like, we'll take guys like Gerald Everett, guys who come out and are just, they look like absolute freaks at the tight end position. and then they're just fine. They're never big producers. They end up in the NFL being 40 to 50 catch guys. Is that kind of is Delp the guy that's just the is not achieving what he like? He's good, but he's never going to be more like Chip Ryman. Some of the traits that he has suggest that he could be a big time receiver. He probably never will be, because teams will see him as blocking tight end and they just go blocking tight end. Is Delp going to be one of those guys that has traits that should be better on the field, but ultimately is just a fine tight end?
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of it comes from kind of the, like I said, the short arms. Like he tested athletically, well, and everything, but like you look at a guy that um it for a 6'5" frame to have sub 32-inch arms. We joked about Ruben Bain, and I think Bain came in at what, 6'3", maybe 6'4", but like these guys, it becomes like, okay, can they block then? Because are they going to be able to reach and get into people's bodies? He's just an interesting guy, because I think everybody really, really expected more from him, especially, you look at what Bowers did, right? And then he came out and he had 2 years post Bowers to really jump off the page, and never did. And so, yeah, I think you see a guy that could be a very, long career tight end. And you brought up Gerald Everett, right? A second round pick, that played, 124 games in his career. Never had more than
Was right. He was just
yeah,
he was hyped coming out of college, and it feels like it happens all the time. You're like, oh, and maybe I was tempering that with, because we've had the Rob Hauslers, we've had the like guys that you're like, oh, we love him, and they're just fine players, but they're never turned out to anything special. Gerald Everett's one that comes to mind. Who's the one that was Denver and Seattle?
oh yeah, Noah Fant.
Noah Fant, another. It's they're good, but the numbers don't say they're great.
Yeah,
But they're nice guys to have on the team. They just produce nicely, and tight end seems to go that way, and you can have an okay career with that. It's not every day you get a Trey McBride or a Brock Bowers or a Travis Kelce or George Kittle. These guys are unicorns.
right.
But
But that also brings us to like the other guys, right? So we talked about Delp, and then you look at a guy like Max Clare. Clare was at Purdue for 3 years, uh, had 51 receptions for 685 yards and 4 touchdowns at Purdue, and then goes to Ohio State and puts up, slightly less numbers because they have so many more weapons. And then people go, oh yeah, like he's a day 2 guy now. And you're like, well, he's probably a day 2 guy at Purdue, right? Um, and you look at that, and you know you see a guy in Claire who is athletic, catches the ball well, is more of kind of that move slot, but can be in line if needed. It's not his strength for sure, but it's something that he can do, and he's done, well at times. And so you have a guy like him, and you're like, okay, well, where do we take him? And it's probably, day 2, like 3rd round. But in this class, you might go, you know what, I'll take him a little higher. Ironically, he played most of his snaps in line in his career. I mean, it's like a 50.4 to 49.6, but like, he played most of his snaps in line in his career, and he just got better at it every year. Then you do have kind of the true why. You have that guy in this class in Sam Roush. Roush is 6'6", 267 pounds. Moved well enough, 4.7, but then you see the other numbers, right? 38.5-inch vert, 10.6 broad. You're like, oh damn, for 267
yes,
pounds, this guy moves. moves. And played for 4 years, 288 yards his sophomore year, 334 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then 545 yards and 2 touchdowns his senior year. Gives big time, like Dawson Knox type vibes, like will be the other tight end from a guy. So, if the Cardinals didn't have Ryman, a guy like Roush in round 3 would make a lot of sense to me, actually,
Yeah.
because he's a guy that can be the, dirty, gritty tight end in those 2 tight end sets, but also is athletic and skilled enough to get out and catch the ball. And, you mentioned it, right, with Tip. We both are big Tip guys. We think it's going to work out, or we're hopeful it works out. But the reality of the situation is, um, he didn't have a lot of production coming out. And so when you talk about that and you look at that, um, 420 yards total, well, Roush had that in a season at Stanford. I mean, he had 545 yards and 2 touchdowns this season. And Tip had 420 yards and 5 touchdowns in his career. So, again, you look at it, you like what these guys bring, but then you also kind of wonder, is day 2 too rich for this class, or for this, for the Cardinals?
Well, and probably,
I guess it
and
just
we talked about that for us. Is we're probably looking at, in terms of draft priority, that it would make sense that the Cardinals stick to day 3 guys, because they've got their Tip, they've got, and the guys that need to potentially replace are Elijah Higgins and Keegan Catoriano, those guys, the Rivaldo Fairweather. So you're the guys that, like the Travis Vokaleks and the Josiah DeGuara and the Pharaoh Browns of this world. And unless Tip is, and we're assuming he's going to come back, so they've got McBride, Tip, and so long term, the day 2 guys probably feel rich unless you see them filling a role early. And Elijah Higgins is going to be a free agent after this year. Not that that changes, but Elijah Higgins was a 6th round pick. And as nice, it's like, he was part of the groundbreak. We joked about that. He is well liked in the locker room, but there's not, like, you look at his production on the field and you're looking, there's nothing special that he's done. He's a decent number 2, and he's really kind of a number 3 now. Like, he blocks okay. He's a decent receiver. He can make some explosive plays, but the Cardinals are looking more at, I guess, need wise, unless they find someone special, they don't need more than someone who's going to be consistent at the back of the roster.
Well, and that's what the beauty of this draft is, Jess. And I know people are going to be screaming at their computers or in their head, like, you idiots, they don't need to draft a tight end. Jess and I aren't saying they need to, but we're also looking at things and going like, hey, like, it's time to start planning instead of reacting, right? Like,
yeah,
we talked about that with the wide receivers, like, plan. We expect something to get done this offseason with Michael Wilson. But if it doesn't, let's just say it doesn't, let's have a plan to replace him. If you aren't going to, pick up, and right now it would make sense, I'm not saying in next year, but if you're not planning on picking up Marvin Harrison Jr.'s 5th year option, which is going to be in the $28 million range, then let's have a plan in place. And we're saying the same thing now. You have no idea what you have in Tip Ryman. You know that Elijah Higgins is a free agent after this year. And I know people are going, well, you can just bring, or how about this? You get a guy that is on your roster for a year, and then he just fills right in the next year. Wouldn't that be nice?
It's cheaper. It's a cheaper way to do it.
And,
and you have more continuity because you don't have a guy that's learning the system for the first time. And so, is there anyone else worth looking at day two then?
nope, nope. But there are some guys on day three that I think fit exactly what we're talking about.
So let's do that. Coming up next on the Res here podcast, Best Cardinals Talking Web. Let's break down the day three guys, what they could have in store for the Cardinals. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Res here podcast, Best Cardinals Talk on the Web, looking at day three talent on tight end. Guys that this is more the range where the Cardinals have a fourth round, a fifth round, a sixth round, a seventh rounder, and we could viably see them moving around, so they might pick up another day three pick. So these are the guys to kind of know who are the guys that you like on day three as potential fits.
Well, the first guy is a really interesting one, and it's Michael Trigg out of Baylor. So Trigg started his career as a highly rated prospect at USC. Then he went to Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. Never really fit in there. Wasn't terrible, by the way. Just never really fit in there. But the last 2 years at Baylor, Trigg has really kind of come into his zone. 6 foot, 6'4", 240 pounds, long arms, decent athlete. And there was a name that you threw out earlier, Gerald Everett. Oh boy, does that kind of remind me of who Trigg is. And by the way, who does Gerald Everett kind of play like? Elijah Higgins, right? Like, so you're talking about that Elijah Higgins role. Trigg is a guy the last 2 years, 395 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then his super senior year at Baylor, 694 yards and 6 touchdowns on 50 catches. A guy that has averaged right over 13 yards per reception in his career at all 3 stops. And he's a guy that you look at and you're just like, he fits what they want to do. He's projected to go in round 4. That would kind of be, again, I know some people will be like, it's too early. Okay, I'm not going to disagree with that, but it wouldn't be the worst possible fit for the Cardinals, especially when you're talking about, again, a day 3 guy that is probably not going to contribute a ton as a rookie, but can be a guy that helps out in year 2, replacing, Elijah Higgins. Or, I was just kind of thinking about this, kicking around in my brain. What if they moved on from Tip Ryman, right? Like 2 years. I know he's a 3rd round pick and people hate to give up on 3rd round picks, but he's done nothing. I'm not saying give up on him this year, but if you get a whole lot of nothing in 2026, isn't it just kind of time? So that, that's one of the things that I was kind of thinking about. From there you've got Joe Royer, the former Ohio State, to Cincinnati transfer. You look at Royer, sorry, 6'5", 250. I mean, he came at 247, but 250. A guy that has done it all. He was the inline tight end at Ohio State, and then went over to Cincinnati, and they gave him a little more flexibility, no pun intended. 522 yards and 3 touchdowns last year, 416 yards, 4 touchdowns this year. A guy that just kind of fits into what we talked about in a role. Not a guy that's going to demand targets, not a guy that's going to demand getting early time or anything like that, but a guy that can help out, over or in time after next year. The last guy that I would bring up that could make sense for the Cardinals would be a guy like Dallas Bentley out of Utah. He's another guy that came in, 620 yards, 6 touchdowns this year, and he's an inline guy. So again, we're talking about a guy that is looked at more to replace Tip than he would Elijah. So like, you have options on both sides of what you're looking for. You've got guys that do both, and the reality is, typically, if you don't draft a guy in the top 4, maybe 5, you're going to get a guy in in undrafted free agency that's going to fill out what you need as far as a backup goes. He may not be a guy that is going to, have the Elijah Higgins impact out of the 6th round. But, those guys are, I don't want to say easy to find, because that, is unfair to what Elijah has done in his career, but he's a guy that could, offer something.
And with that, we'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Sierra podcast. This is our Cardinals Talk on the Web. We talked tight ends. We've got more shows coming up talking about offensive linemen, defensive linemen, those in the days to come. But until then, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.